Hello and welcome to the Wednesday Night War preview. I'm Adam Wilborn from WhatCulture, joined by the Dadley Boyz of WhatCulture, paid NXT shill Michael Hamflett and paid AEW shill Michael Sidgwick to preview tonight's episodes of NXT and AEW Dynamite. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts, where we not only review the Wednesday Night War, but also Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-views. We have interviews, roundtable discussions, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But as I said, joined by Michael Sidgwick and Michael Hamflett to look ahead to tonight's Wednesday Night War. A great set of shows. Let's start with AEW Dynamite and you, Michael Sidgwick. A really exciting looking show tonight, and the reveal of the other half of the TNT Championship Tournament. First of all, your thoughts on that and who you think is also going to be involved alongside the likes of Cody, Sammy Guevara, etc.
Yeah, I wish there was a crowd. I really wish there was a crowd. There isn't a goddamn crowd, which is going to ruin everything. And that's the thing where I keep forgetting that there isn't going to be a crowd. So I look at these brackets and I think I'm not a fan of the title, to be honest, at all. But I look at the brackets and I think there's a potential hell of a tournament here if the other side matches up to the various permutations of this left side of the bracket. And I remember, oh my God, there's no crowd. Just to briefly take you through my thoughts on the title, if you want them more in depth, there is an article on whatculture.com/WWE entitled How AEW Just Took Fan Service Too Far. But to give you the abridged version of that, I just feel like a mid-card title, as I've said at length before, is an oxymoron. And every counter argument, I think, I'm not saying I'm the sole voice of reason or the only clever guy in the room, but every counter argument to me, I think people need to listen to their own words a little bit better. It feels like when they're saying there's lots of guys with nothing to do, then that's just a consolation prize for them. It feels like a cold, pragmatic way of getting them more TV time as opposed to what this ultimately should be, and that's a prize. Ultimately, the IWGP Intercontinental title works. It sells tickets on the New Beginning in Sapporo, Osaka, Tokyo, wherever. If there's the two lesser than shows of the main event, the Intercontinental title in New Japan Pro Wrestling is going to sell tickets and the matches are going to be really great. But as I put it in the article, no young lion dreams of winning that title. It's the IWGP heavyweight. The best they can get this TNT championship is up there, and it's still not perfect. And it's still a bit capitalistic rather than artistic, which annoys my sensibilities as a fan. But regardless, I think this left hand of the bracket is truly, truly inspired. We won't go into it in too much depth, but usually you can trace a line to the final, and you can't. There's a gigantic blockade in front of that final in the form of the probable semi. In terms of the other side of the bracket, I firmly expect Joey Janela to be on that side. I think it's a good vehicle to get him a TV match, and you need someone realistically who can lose. He can be the Sean Spears, even though I find one more entertaining than the other. I think MJF's too far up in the singles rankings to be in this tournament. I think he's been built as a potential pay-per-view opponent for Jon Moxley. And again, they're going to have to differentiate between who's in that group of contenders and who's in the other. So I wouldn't expect to see Hager in it, for example. So I would say Joey Janela, Orange Cassidy on either side of the brackets, Pac if he's in the US. But again, it's just everything's all muddled. So I don't know. I realistically don't know. What about you, Hamflett?
When you said Pac, I winced a bit because he feels too big. And that is an inherent issue with the invention of this belt, is that other than Cody, who's in there for a really great storyline reason, it's almost immediately marginalizing some of these talents of being like splitting them into the haves and the have-nots of the roster. You said it about MJF, and I certainly think that about Pac as well. Makes it trickier to find guys, but then at the other end of that, if you just pillage dark for guys to use, I'm thinking someone like Jimmy Havoc or Colt Cabana, have they been given enough to do on television yet that puts them in line for a shot at any title, let alone a brand new one? It's a tricky test AEW have set themselves. I'm with Sidgwick 100% on the purpose of this title or the point of it even existing. But and I say this with some pain, I have absolute faith and trust in them to get it right. I think the tournament will be enjoyable. usual disclaimer applies to both these shows. I wish none of these matches were happening, just to get out of the way. Like, I don't need tournament matches. I don't need reminding that matches are happening. I don't need things like Double or Nothing being presented as a destination when there's a really good chance that that's not even going to go ahead. I just wish that it wasn't, that wrestling still wasn't so stubborn, but to just get out of the way. That applies to AEW and NXT. But given a tournament to watch,
doing the NXT bit as well, right?
We absolutely will do. Given a tournament to watch under normal circumstances, I would trust AEW to get this right. And as Cedric points out there, the semi-finals on what we've seen in the bracket so far are extremely appealing because of the 4 names that they've mentioned. Not to mention like all the pre-existing issues that have existed between those 2 matches with Cody and Sean Spears, obviously, and Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara. So all signs point to this element of it going really, really well. It's just whoever wins it at the end, if it indeed is Cody, what for it then? Like, how can they use a television title once it's not around the waist of someone like a Cody Rhodes and not make the person holding it feel like a secondary concern? That in itself is kind of dismissive of whoever's holding it.
Well, to get people excited for the launch of this tournament, which starts, of course, next week, there is a match set for tonight. Cody and Darby Allin versus Sammy Guevara and Sean Spears. A great precursor to all this, Michael Sidgwick.
Yes, absolutely. There's a WCW Battle Bowl vibe about this sort of tag team scenario. It's a nice enough way of getting people hyped for the tournament. There's a means of planting some story beats that could bloom in the tournament singles matches themselves. It's kind of a New Japan Pro Wrestling way of going about it. And given that over the past decade, it's the greatest booked wrestling promotion, I would personally argue that AEW is kind of seizing that crown, but there's no better inspiration, in my opinion, than New Japan, just for a bit of a flavor. It needs to intersect that, get people hyped for the matches, and plan some stuff that can bloom from those matches. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. It's an odd mixture of old and new schools in terms of Sean Spears and Sammy Guevara. I don't know how that's going to gel, if at all. Cody and Darby, of course, have teamed to very good effect against the Butcher and the Blade a few months back. Yeah, this should be nice, functional stuff.
They've obviously not teased a great deal for tonight's episode, but before we get to Kenny Omega versus Trent, which could well be the match of the night, we need to talk about Lance Archer. He's going to debut tonight, and Michael Hamflett, who's getting murdered?
Some goober that I probably don't even know because I forget to read the results of Dark, let alone watch it. There's enough warm bodies there, I suppose, like enough of the baddies. Whether or not it's like a baby face or a heel probably doesn't matter. It's got to be a baby face. But then I suppose the idea of Lance Archer is that he just takes down everybody dies. This debut is really important, I think, and I feel for him like I did Brody Lee last week, having to have a debut match in an empty arena. But I wasn't a huge fan of Brody Lee's debut, and I don't know if part of that was because the lack of a crowd like created a bit of a lack of impact. But Archer similarly needs to make that huge splash wherever possible. There's been a little bit of a sniff of an accusation towards Jake Roberts that he's cutting the promos for the benefit of himself rather than for Lance Archer on television. I'm not sure I agree with that. He's such an amazing talker. And we've yet to see Archer wrestle. And I think as soon as he does, that will enhance all of Jake's quite powerful words. So I'd like to see him do that, if nothing else, to bring some life to Jake's promos so far and just kind of like shut some naysayers up, because I think that act seems fairly solid for the time being. I hope it's a success, but just based on last week, I've got my worries slightly. It's out of everybody's hands. It's nobody's fault. It's not AEW's fault. It's not Lance Archer's. I hope it's a success.
For people who haven't seen Lance Archer, people who haven't seen, his stuff in New Japan, Michael Sidgwick, what can we expect tonight?
You can expect like an improbably agile big man who, without giving the big great spot that he can do away too much, I'm going to. This is a man who can do a rope walk and just as a flex. The spot kind of annoys me a little bit because I think he does it a little bit too long, but as a flex, he'll sometimes do 2 ropes and then hit someone, usually a man much smaller than him because he is gigantic, which makes this all the more impressive, over the head. He's an agile big man. He has got a way about his style that he's incorporated a lot of the modern elements where he can do deceptive rope dances, which end up in pounces. He can really... He's not just tall, he can project himself as even taller by hoisting people really far into the air using the full length of his arms and then slamming them down. He's just a guy who's got full mastery of what his USP is. And at the same time, he can incorporate styles that really physically he has no right to pull off into his own matches. And particularly over the last 2 years, a lot of his work with the Killer Elite Squad went quite unheralded. I thought that was still really impressive, but clearly the career breakthrough for him at such a late age was last year's G1 Climax, in which he wrestled. There weren't obviously the best technical matches in the tournament, but he has such a way of intersecting with his sheer look, the theatre and the quality of professional wrestling. He turned a lot of people's eyes. So yeah, I think through cold pragmatism, he will go up against QT Marshall, possibly, because QT Marshall will be on hand for production duties because he's a key backstage member of the AEW team. He's obviously a really good undercard worker in his own right, so I feel like it will be him for no other reason than he can absorb a loss, he's there, and he can make people look really, really good.
Michael Hamflett, Kenny Omega versus Trent set for tonight. What a match that's going to be.
Yeah, it's as depressing as it is exciting, really. This, for a bit of post-podcast homework for anybody that has time to kill, I think it was Power Struggle. I think it was Power Struggle, but 2017, if you search Kenny Omega and Trent or Kenny Omega and Beretta from New Japan, incredible. The chemistry they've got was fantastic. Omega made Trent Beretta feel like a main event level wrestler when prior to that, he'd always worked sort of as that underneath guy. He was as much a super athlete, but a guy that was often used to set people up rather than appear as if he belonged with them. And I think that match, the match booking tonight is like a gentle reference to that for those that know, and thus will be a surprise package to those that don't. So it's a win-win. It's likely to be the best match of the night across both shows, I think. And yet, I don't know, like Omega's great and one of the best, if not the best, at working around this empty arena stuff. But what was so great about this New Japan match, and really the highest recommendation to go and watch it, was the very simplistic crowd manipulation of creating the idea that Trent would somehow beat Kenny Omega, the clean of the best bout machine. And I don't think they obviously literally can't summon that reaction in an empty Dynamite venue, but also they've got to find a new way to make this match interesting. 100% faith in the workers, less so in the circumstances with which they've got to work.
Yeah, I have to echo that match. You should seriously go and watch it. I wouldn't recommend you do it before tonight's time.
Yeah,
I'd recommend you do it afterwards because can only pale in comparison and make you a little bit sad. But Kenny Omega's performance in that match is so incredible because it's not just that simple, basic route where, because I'm a main eventer, if you can go 50-50 with me, that means you're on my level. Like, that's not how pro wrestling works. That's not how you hoist someone to your level in the course of a match. You have to be more delicate with it. You have to sort of treat the audience's intelligence with more respect. And the way Trent, who's also fabulous in that match, got his way into it gradually and organically to the point where, as Hamflett points out, this emerging demigod and this rank and file undercard usually gets a role in a 6-man on a Road 2 tour, was almost on his level throughout, was just absolutely fabulously done. And now that this Hamflett has annoyed me into remembering it, he's ruined Dynamite for me. Sorry, the F word let slip because Hamflett did this on purpose. I think he's brought this match up to make me realize that this Dynamite thing shouldn't be going ahead. It shouldn't be. There's too many wrestlers and there's too much physical contact. And have you timestamped that swear word?
Don't worry. Finally, speaking of people getting wound up, one of the big things everyone's been talking about over the past 7 days is Brody Lee and his impression, his homage, whatever you want to call it, to Vince McMahon. Do you think, Michael Sidgwick, we're going to see more shots at WWE from the Dark Order's Exalted One tonight?
And I think Ben Roy needs to, on the old edit and share, do some scrubbing there, 'cause it's not my fault. He's aware of it now. Out my hands, I apologize. I suspect that, yes, we'll see some more shots. I don't think, as we discussed on last week's review podcast, I don't necessarily think that was just a 2-minute joke that he needed to get out of his system, because I think that he's got a direct vision for this character and for the Dark Order itself that is going to shift it from Scientology adjacent cult or just general spooky stuff and masks into something that explores and makes coherent, the idea and concept of power. So I do think we'll see more of it. I don't think it'll be quite as on the nose, literally, as a sneeze is. But I do think the whole suited aesthetic, we might see some more quirks that he has. I don't know, maybe he'll try and shag his daughter. Something like that will echo Vince McMahon. But now that the point has been made, I think it'll probably be more of a visual element to the presentation of the Dark Order. To be honest, I'm all up for it. We need discourse in these times. We absolutely need it.
I totally agree. You know, it was just something to talk about last week, wasn't it? You know, like he looks better in a suit than he does those pajamas he bought for wrestling gear. Anyway, like,
Yeah,
I believe the Brody Lee character so much more as this Dark Order leader than that, like that diet Luke Harper gimmick that debuted on night one with the jacket, and then how he looked in the ring. I think this is a far superior way to go. It doesn't require wrestling. As Cedric points out, it was genuinely good for the conversation. It was just something to grab onto when there's so little like emerging from wrestling. Even as we talk in WrestleMania week, it felt like that had a little bit more buzz about it. So why not? You know, just like this would be the time. I don't know how much has been pre-taped. Cedric might be able to fill me in there. Like some of this might already be done. So we might be talking about things. There might be 6 weeks worth of Brody Lee doing good Vince McMahon crack.
The latest on the schedule, now that you bring it up, according to, I think it was Dave Meltzer, of course it was Dave Meltzer, they have taped a significant amount of content from a location they've intentionally kept secret because they don't want the more engaged AEW fans, shall we say, to camp out outside a venue. I would absolutely love it, right? Love it if they were to film it in Darby Allin's house, because that's where the Lance Archer vignette when he was piling the bodies all around the ring, that was in Darby Allin's house in his backyard. I'd love them to go for a unique aesthetic like that rather than just a warehouse. You know what I mean? Or a studio setting.
Right, moving over to NXT now, a sort of takeover level of match headlining the show tonight, as you would expect, because they can't do NXT takeover for obvious reasons. Michael Hamflett, how are you feeling about the NXT North American Championship triple threat match? Keith Lee defending his title against Dominik Dijakovic and, of course, Damian Priest.
Depressed as mate, absolutely gutted. Was really looking forward to this match. Somehow they kind of just about worked me into wanting to see Lee and Dijakovic because of Priest's involvement, because I like him that much. This will be great, but weird. They're going to do some big stuff. That's the saddest thing about this. The Dijakovic-Lee pairing that I know loads of people are sick of, and I do understand that, but it demands that we see some bombs get thrown and some bodies get chucked all over the place. And at what cost? Like, to what end? To pop the nobody in the venue, or to get a little bit of buzz on Twitter when most people probably watch AEW anyway because they've proven at this point to kind of get this formula down better. It just feels so empty at the end for what really, I feel sorry more for anybody else than Damian Priest, because Dijakovic and Lee have done this before. They've flexed these muscles before. You sense Lee's going to retain because it seems daft to book quite big title change at this point, not least when Lee's barely defended this title yet. So yeah, I can't will myself into excitement over this particular match because nothing about the setup tells me it's going to be any good. It's going to be in that quiet, empty performance center. It makes me wish that there was something wrapped around it like there is Ciampa Gargano, or something that makes it stand out more as a unique piece of work, because I just think with no crowd, none of this will land. The only thing that will land will be men's bodies on a very hard floor to silence.
Yeah, I want to echo what Hamflett was saying on last week's preview, because he made a very, very good point. These matches, the dynamic between Dijakovic and Lee in particular, which I expect, it's not as if Damian Priest is going to add like a chain wrestling element to it. He's another big lad who can do things that big lads necessarily should not be doing. Rests not entirely, but like almost entirely on the crowd reaction, because they are getting slammed about, which they never do in ordinary wrestling matches because they're so big. And because after having been slammed, they are summoning up the energy to do slamming in response. And the story beat of the match is who can be the big meaty peacock and win the courtship ritual for the audience, get the most energy back from them, pull off the biggest bomb, get the biggest pop. it's such an interactive spectacle, that match, that, as Hamfler pointed out last week, it is going to very much look silly in that context unless they scale back the big blockbuster moments. But the issue is that they're not very good at the understated pro wrestling compared to some of the other pro wrestlers on that brand, and people don't want understated, really nicely transitioned pro wrestling out of this dynamic. They want the bombs. There's no bombs for them to want. There's no they. It's going to be a strange match unless they are cognizant of why it can go wrong and correct it in anticipation of it going wrong.
Keith Lee to retain though, Michael Sidgwick?
Yeah, I'd say so. The only other option, which, goddamn it, I'm kind of worried they will take, not that it matters going forward under these conditions, is that they strap up Dijakovic for the express, creatively bankrupt purpose of doing the match yet again as a rematch.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting how they work around this one. We also have a second chance gauntlet match for that final spot in the ladder match, which I do believe is taking place next week, if I'm not mistaken. It is Dakota Kai versus Xia Li versus Shotzi Blackheart versus Kaden Carter versus Aaliyah versus Deonna Purrazzo. Michael Hamflet, who do you think deserves or will win that second chance gauntlet match? Because my money is on Dakota Kai.
Yeah, Dakota Kai feels like the heavy favorite here. I loved this match 6 weeks ago, but I loved pro wrestling and I loved my family 6 weeks ago. So a lot can change in 6 weeks. I think it's such a cool concept to give these losers this second chance, like a second bite, as it were, when there's so many people in the main match already. When it was a takeover, the placement on the card was prize itself. So like I just thought the whole concept, it was really cool. It's again making use of the quantity and the quality of the women's division. But looking at the list and knowing what we already know about how these shows are playing out in the Empty Performance Center, it feels like it's got to be Dakota Kai. There's no pop to be gained from a surprise victory for Xia Li or a Shotzi Blackheart. There's no purpose to the likes of Kaden Carter or Aaliyah putting themselves through needless damage in an empty gym ladder match that was taped. I can't believe I've just said those words. That just seems like it's danger on top of danger where there shouldn't be any. So Kai feels like the right character choice for that match. But this is the most flagrant abuse of real world problems that we'll see on a wrestling show this week. It's not cool.
No.
Is this match, how many people are in it? Six?
Six.
Referee, timekeeper, ring announcer, commentators. That goes above social distancing, doesn't it?
It's more than anything at WrestleMania, I think this.
Yeah.
It's not on.
It's one of those where there's a moral concern about literally everything, as I mentioned on a podcast. I think it was a couple of weeks back. When I'm walking to the supermarket and I watch a car drive past, I'm thinking, where else are you going other than the supermarket, and why can't you walk? And I'm thinking that person in that car is doing a bad thing. So when I see 6 people in a ring, that's just going to bring into focus the reason why it shouldn't be happening, when realistically a tag team match on AEW or a tag team match on Raw is probably as dangerous realistically. But I just think because wrestling's a visual thing and we're all visually stimulated and we think bigger equals more dramatic, when I see 6 people in that ring, I'm just going to get turned off. Like, I am going to get turned off. But ironically, because there's going to be such a visual blur of activity, and I think you're going to see, hear a lot more, I think it'll be a more dynamic match. It'll be like a better match than a lot of things we're going to see across both shows because of the unusual multi-man circumstances, but it's going to be the most irresponsible.
Dakota Kai to go through from the gauntlet for you, though, Sidge?
Yes, I would say so. I think, as Hamflet points out, it's a nice way it's like kind of an appeasement match because that performance center is bursting to the seams with talent, a lot of whom are disenfranchised. I think this is a cute way of getting them on TV in huge number. I think it's a nice way of testing, or theoretically, because there is no audience, a way of testing in Full Sail who might get a push after takeover season. But yeah, I think Dakota Kai, at some point, you're going to have to put a really good worker in there to act as a pivot around everything else, much like, I'm not saying just anywhere near the level of a Kyle O'Reilly, but in Adam Wilborn's favorite match of all time, that fatal four-way ladder match at TakeOver 25, I think you genuinely need at least one really sort of solid, relatively veteran presence to keep it from getting derailed.
I agree. The final match booked for tonight, booked by Adam Cole, in fact, on last week's show, is the Velveteen Dream versus Bobby Fish. A wonderful setup for this, Michael Hamflett, for a really entertaining match on paper.
Yeah. My fears are this is either a total triumph or a complete disaster. Velveteen Dream hasn't had the best in-ring work yesterday, and his story has probably been the subject of the most violent-minded debate on this podcast back when we all cared enough to have such feelings about pro wrestling. And I think in another world, this would have been brilliantly in service of that story. Me and Sidgwick could have disagreed vehemently about this tomorrow morning, and it would have been brilliant. But the match might not have delivered, and I would have argued that wouldn't have mattered. Now the match kind of has to matter because it's the only thing we've got to look at. There's no crowd for Velveteen Dream to interact with or pop at. He's got to be an earnest babyface against Bobby Fish. He's a pretty good heel, but with respect to Bobby Fish, probably the weakest individual member of the Undisputed Era in singles matches at this point due to mounting injuries and things of that nature. I don't know. I really wish they would steer into the patter, but I can already hear Michael Sidgwick's giggles at the prospect of NXT ever doing that about anything. I worry quite significantly for this. If this is a success, I think it'll be a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I've got to echo Hamflett's concerns. I've got no problem with the story. I hated the first phase and what it sort of presumed of what William Regal would do to get a match together and what it meant about contention and all of that boring stuff. But now that the dynamics established, the match is going to happen. I think this is a really neat way of getting to it. Again, caveat, under normal circumstances. The reason why stables exist is for this exact precise reason. You've got a guy, a heel, who is far more arrogant than he is good, but he's still very good. But nonetheless, he still feels like he needs an insurance policy. There's still that inherent cowardice about the fact that he's a heel. Therefore, he surrounds himself with like-minded bastard individuals and they're lower on the power scale than he is, so he can just dispatch them to do his dirty work, weaken them ahead of the big match, and in the process, you've got at least 2 weeks of television, 3 if they want to go back to Roderick Strong, sewn up. It's perfect. This stable-oriented television storytelling is fantastic, and it boils my piss that we haven't seen it in WWE for nigh on 2 decades when Vince McMahon decided, pro wrestling's crap and sports entertainment's great. But no problem with this match taking place. It's just Bobby Fish is not the best person in the Undisputed Era by quite some distance at this point. Again, it's fine. He's had some absolute bangers. He's getting on. He's had injuries, etc. Velveteen Dream is in a kind of a similar boat, except he's clearly far younger. He's also had very, very scary, debilitating injuries that seem to have scuppered his in-ring work. Mash all of that together with the empty gym context. This is not going to be very good, I don't think.
Very quickly, Michael Sidgwick, do you think Charlotte Flair could show up tonight ahead of WrestleMania match against Rhea Ripley?
She said that she would see Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania, if you remember. However, what if she was taking the old piss and she will instead meet her on the ramp, which is the second most dangerous place in Florida?
Pamphlet.
Sidgwick's right. The scripting was there to tell us that she probably won't be NXT. But again, like we know that this entire roster has at various different points been in and out of this performance center over a period of days. Rhea Ripley could believably say, like, I know you're here, and if you're not here, I know you live down the road. So get here tonight. It's such a daft thing in principle, if you stop and think about it for more than 5 seconds, that she probably should come to her show and call her out. But nah, I think astonishingly, what we saw on Raw was the go-home angle for this NXT Women's title match. A disastrous state of affairs all around.
Fair enough.
Sorry, very quickly, you know what they should do? They did the Rhea Ripley big inside Raymond James Stadium vignette that seemed to do really well. I didn't like it personally, but a lot of people really liked it. They should instead just have her doing it in the performance center.
Just looking up at the ceilings and stuff. Ah,
Well, like seriously, the game's changed a little bit. She could be, more au fait with these smaller, more intimate venues that Charlotte Flair has outgrown. And maybe she can put over the idea that she's a grittier fighter. She's going to fight harder. She isn't motivated by success. She's just motivated by winning. They could maybe subvert that, but given their complete and utter no sell of the situation, I don't think that they've got it in their DNA as a company to acknowledge the outside situation. It's kind of like a keep calm and carry on deal with NXT and WWE.
Sidge, who wins the Wednesday Night War, and what are the numbers they're doing?
Oh, let's get the old book out. I think that we are going to see. I mean, I think we all have a laugh at the numbers. We all have a laugh. I think that Raw number is not so much an aberration, but I think it's a sign of the times. People are far more interested in watching the news with hope or with grim acceptance. I think 750 plays 615.
I was going to go 800, 600. I just feel like around where we were last week, and everything dropping, more objective evidence that it's not wrestling the escape that I think the wrestling companies thought it would be.
I'm going to go 800, play 700. I still have hope for now, at least. But let us know your thoughts ahead of the Wednesday Night War in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus, you can let us know your thoughts on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. And watch there, you can follow all three of us. You can follow paid NXT shill Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
You can follow paid AEW shill Michael Sidgwick at
Sidgwick.
And you can follow the impartial judge of everything, me, at Adam Wilborn on Twitter. Follow us all at WhatCultureWWE. This has been the Wednesday Night War preview. My thanks to the Dadley Boyz. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.